101 Facts about Basic Finance to Fall Asleep to. Part 1, The Dawn of Personal Wealth. Let's journey back to a time when the very idea of personal finance didn't exist. Close your eyes and imagine ancient Mesopotamia, around 3500 BCE, where the first sparks of financial understanding began to glow in the human consciousness. In these early civilizations, wealth wasn't measured in coins or paper bills. The Sumerians developed one of humanity's first systems of accounting, using clay tablets to record debts and credits. These simple marks in wet clay represented something revolutionary: the ability to track what you owned and what you owed. For the first time in human history, ordinary people could see their wealth written down, making the invisible visible. As we move forward through time, around 3000 BCE, something remarkable happened. The concept of interest emerged in ancient Mesopotamia. Farmers would borrow grain to plant their fields, and when harvest came, they would repay the loan with a little extra. This wasn't exploitation in its original form, it was recognition that borrowed resources had value over time. The typical interest rate was about 33% per year for grain loans, which sounds high to our modern ears, but it reflected the real risks of farming in an unpredictable world. By 1800 BCE, King Hammurabi of Babylon created his famous Code of Laws, and nestled within these ancient rules were some of the first consumer protections in history. The code limited interest rates to prevent lenders from trapping borrowers in endless cycles of debt. Grain loans couldn't exceed 33% interest, and silver loans were capped at 20%. This was a pivotal moment, society recognizing that for personal finance to help rather than harm, there needed to be boundaries and fairness. Now, let's drift forward to ancient Egypt, around 2000 BCE, where the grain banks emerged. These weren't banks as we know them today, but they served a similar purpose. Farmers could store their surplus grain in royal warehouses and withdraw it when needed, receiving a token as proof of deposit. This simple system meant that a poor farmer could save during good years and draw upon those savings during lean times. It was perhaps the first true saving system accessible to common people, transforming survival from season to season into something more predictable. In ancient Greece, around 400 BCE, the Trapetitae, literally, table men, set up tables in marketplaces where they would accept deposits, make loans, and exchange currencies. These were the world's first retail bankers, and they made financial services available not just to the wealthy merchants, but to craftsmen, farmers, and ordinary citizens. A potter could now save his earnings safely rather than hiding coins in his home. A weaver could borrow to buy better materials. Personal finance was becoming democratized. The Romans took these ideas even further. By 350 BCE, they had developed the Argentarii, bankers who offered services that would feel familiar to us today, accepting deposits, making loans, and even operating something similar to checking accounts. Roman soldiers, for instance, could deposit their pay with Argentarii and have it safely transferred to their families back home. This meant that even a common soldier could manage his finances across great distances, providing for loved ones while serving far from home. Around 1100 CE, during the Middle Ages, something extraordinary happened in Italy. The merchant families of Venice, Genoa, and Florence began creating financial instruments that would change everything. They developed the bill of exchange, which allowed a merchant to deposit money in one city and withdraw it in another, without the danger of carrying heavy coins across bandit-infested roads. But more importantly, these innovations began filtering down to smaller traders and artisans, who could now participate in commerce beyond their local villages. Perhaps most revolutionary was the emergence of the Monte di Pieta in Italy during the 1460s. These were lending institutions established by the Franciscan order specifically to help the poor. Unlike moneylenders who charged crushing interest rates, the Monte charged minimal fees just to cover costs. A struggling craftsman could borrow against the tools of his trade without losing everything. A widow could pawn her goods temporarily to feed her children, and then reclaim them when times improved. This was the first widespread system of ethical lending designed specifically to lift people out of poverty rather than profit from their desperation. As you breathe slowly and deeply, consider how these ancient innovations, the simple act of recording debts on clay, the fair limits on interest, the safe storage of grain, the marketplace banker's table, and the compassionate loan to a struggling family, were all steps toward a powerful truth, that understanding and managing personal finances could transform not just individual lives, but entire communities, giving the poor tools to build better futures. Part 2, The Age of Enlightenment and Accessibility. As we drift deeper into our story, let's move to 17th century Amsterdam, where something remarkable was taking shape. In 1609, the Dutch established the Amsterdam Wisselbank, the exchange bank, and with it came a profound innovation, the bank account as we know it today. Merchants could deposit their coins and receive a credit in the bank's ledgers. But here's what mattered for ordinary people: the bank maintained stable, trustworthy records. For the first time, a shopkeeper or a skilled craftsman could trust that their life savings wouldn't vanish due to fraudulent coins or dishonest money changers. The security of knowing your wealth was safely recorded brought peace of mind to thousands of working families. Now, let yourself drift to 1680s England, where a simple innovation changed everything for common workers. Goldsmiths, who had strong vaults for storing precious metals, began issuing paper receipts for gold deposits. These receipts could be traded as payment, becoming an early form of paper money. A laborer could now be paid with a paper note instead of heavy, risky-to-carry coins. He could fold his wages into his pocket, walk home safely, and use those notes to buy what his family needed. This portability of wealth meant that even the poorest worker had a safer way to hold and use their earnings. In 1688, another gentle revolution occurred. Lloyd's Coffee House in London became a gathering place where ship owners and merchants would meet to share risk. This evolved into Lloyd's of London, one of the first insurance markets. By the early 1700s, this concept trickled down to ordinary people. A shopkeeper could insure his store against fire. A family could insure their modest home. For the first time, the poor weren't completely devastated by a single disaster. Insurance meant that a lifetime of careful saving wouldn't be wiped away by one terrible stroke of fate. Let's breathe deeply and travel to 1720s France, where something called the tontine became popular among the middle and working classes. Groups of people would pool their money together, and as members passed away, their shares would be distributed to the survivors. While it sounds unusual to modern ears, this was actually one of the first forms of a pension or retirement system accessible to ordinary citizens. A baker or a seamstress could contribute small amounts throughout their working life, knowing that in their old age, they might have something to live on. It planted the seed of an idea, that you could prepare financially for a time when you could no longer work. Moving forward to 1776, we find ourselves in the newly independent American colonies, where something powerful emerged from the chaos of revolution. Benjamin Franklin helped establish ideas about thrift and financial wisdom in his Poor Richard's Almanac, but more importantly, the concept of building societies began to take root. These were cooperative financial institutions where working people, carpenters, blacksmiths, farmers, would pool small savings to help each member buy a home or start a business. By 1780s America, a common laborer could dream of owning property, not through inheritance or luck, but through steady saving and mutual support. In 1791, the United States established its first national bank, but more significant for ordinary people was what came after. By the early 1800s, state-chartered banks began appearing in small towns across America. A farmer in rural Pennsylvania or a shopkeeper in a Massachusetts village now had access to banking services that previously only existed in major cities. You could open an account, save money, get a loan to expand your farm or shop. Finance was no longer just for the urban wealthy, it was becoming rural and democratic. Let's drift now to 1810, when the first savings bank specifically designed for working people opened in Scotland and then spread across Europe. The Ruthwell Parish Bank in Scotland accepted deposits as small as a single penny. Think about that for a moment. A maid, a factory worker, a day laborer could walk into a bank and deposit a penny, and that penny would be recorded, safeguarded, and would earn a tiny bit of interest. This wasn't charity, it was recognition that everyone, regardless of how modest their means, deserved access to financial tools. By the 1830s and 1840s, the building society movement had spread throughout England. Working-class families could contribute a few shillings each week, and eventually, they'd have enough saved collectively to build homes for each member. The Bradford Third Equitable Benefit Building Society, founded in 1851, became a model that spread worldwide. A factory worker could join at age 20, contribute regularly, and by age 35, own a small home free and clear. Home ownership, once the exclusive domain of the wealthy, was becoming achievable for the common person through disciplined saving and community cooperation. In the mid-1800s, another quiet revolution occurred with the spread of postal saving systems, beginning in England in 1861. The post office, which existed in even the smallest villages, became a place where anyone could open a savings account. An elderly widow in a remote hamlet, a young farm boy saving for his future, a domestic servant, all could walk to their local post office and make a deposit. The network of post offices meant that for the first time in history, nearly everyone, everywhere, had physical access to formal savings. And then, in 1864, something remarkable happened in Germany. Friedrich Wilhelm Raiffeisen founded the first credit union designed specifically for farmers and rural poor. Unlike traditional banks that required collateral and charged high interest, credit unions were cooperatives owned by their members. A struggling farmer could borrow at fair rates to buy seeds or repair tools. The profits from the credit union's operations went back to the members as dividends. This model spread rapidly, to Italy, to France, across Europe, and eventually worldwide, because it proved that financial services could be both profitable and genuinely helpful to the poor. As you rest in this knowledge, consider how each of these innovations, from the secure bank account to the penny savings deposit, from insurance protection to cooperative lending, represented another door opening, another barrier falling, another way for ordinary people to build security and hope for their futures. Part 3: The Industrial Age and Financial Empowerment. Let us drift now into the late 1800s, a time of great change and industrialization. In 1875, a simple innovation appeared that would transform how working people managed their money: the passbook. This small booklet, given to every account holder at savings banks, contained a handwritten record of every deposit and withdrawal. A factory worker could hold this book in his hands and see, line by line, how his savings grew. There was something deeply powerful about this tangible record. It made abstract numbers real and gave people a concrete sense of progress. A mother could show her children the growing balance and teach them, through this simple book, that small amounts saved regularly could become something substantial. As we breathe slowly and continue our journey, we arrive at 1881 in Japan, where the government established postal savings accounts specifically to encourage thrift among the common people. The program was designed with the poor in mind, requiring no minimum balance, accepting deposits of any size, and paying interest rates that, while modest, were guaranteed by the government. Within a few years, millions of ordinary Japanese citizens had opened accounts. Rice farmers, silk workers, fishermen, all participated in the formal financial system. This demonstrated something profound, that when financial tools are truly designed to be inclusive and accessible, people of all economic levels will eagerly use them to improve their lives. Let yourself drift to 1886, when the American Express Company introduced the traveler's check. While this might seem like a luxury item, it had important implications for working people who migrated for work. An immigrant laborer could now safely send money back to his family in another country without the risk of it being stolen or lost. These checks could be replaced if lost, unlike cash. For the first time, the poor who traveled, whether for opportunity or necessity, had a secure way to transport their hard-earned wages across great distances. In 1889, Germany introduced the world's first old-age social insurance program under Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. Workers and employers contributed small amounts throughout a person's working life, and upon reaching age 70, they would receive a pension. This wasn't charity, it was earned through years of contribution. For the first time, elderly workers wouldn't have to depend entirely on their children or face destitution in their final years. The concept of retirement as something ordinary people could plan for became real, spreading hope to millions who had previously faced their old age with dread. Moving into the 1890s, we see the rise of industrial credit unions in North America. Alphonse Desjardins founded the first credit union in Quebec in 1900, specifically to help working families escape predatory lenders. At the same time, in the United States, groups of workers in factories and mills began forming their own lending cooperatives. A textile worker could borrow from his credit union to buy a sewing machine and take in work at home. A miner could get a fair-rate loan to bring his family from the old country. These institutions understood something that large banks didn't: the poor needed credit not because they were irresponsible, but because their modest, irregular incomes made traditional banking inaccessible. In 1909, something remarkable happened in the United Kingdom. The Old Age Pensions Act was passed, providing a small but meaningful pension to the elderly poor without requiring prior contributions. While different from insurance-based systems, it represented society acknowledging that everyone deserved basic financial security in old age. A washerwoman who had worked hard all her life could receive 5 shillings a week at age 70. It wasn't wealth, but it was enough to avoid the workhouse, enough for dignity. This idea, that society itself could provide a financial safety net, would transform how people thought about their financial futures. Let us breathe deeply and move to 1913, when the United States established the Federal Reserve System. For ordinary people, this meant something crucial: their money became more stable. Bank panics, which had regularly wiped out the life savings of working families, became less frequent and less severe. A shopkeeper could deposit his earnings knowing that a financial panic wouldn't suddenly make those deposits worthless. This stability was perhaps the most important financial innovation for the poor, because when you have little, you cannot afford to lose any of it. By the 1920s, the installment plan became widespread in America, fundamentally changing how working families could acquire durable goods. A family could buy a refrigerator or a washing machine by making small monthly payments. While we understand today that credit requires careful management, at the time this was revolutionary. A working mother could have a washing machine that saved her hours of backbreaking labor, even if she couldn't afford to pay for it all at once. Time payment plans meant that the comforts and labor-saving devices of modern life weren't exclusively for the wealthy; they could be accessed by anyone with steady work and the discipline to make regular payments. In 1934, emerging from the depths of the Great Depression, the United States created the Federal Housing Administration. This government agency insured mortgages, which encouraged banks to lend to moderate-income families. Before this, home mortgages required massive down payments, often 50% or more, and were short-term, typically needing to be refinanced every few years. The FHA pioneered the long-term, low-down payment mortgage. A factory worker, a clerk, a schoolteacher, these ordinary wage earners could now buy homes with reasonable down payments and 30 years to pay. Homeownership, the foundation of wealth building for millions of families, became achievable for the working class. And finally, as we close this chapter of our story, let's rest on 1935, when the United States established Social Security. Workers would contribute a small percentage of their wages throughout their careers, and in return, they would receive monthly payments in retirement. This wasn't just about money, it was about dignity and independence. A retired coal miner wouldn't have to move in with his children out of destitution. A widowed seamstress would have enough to live on. Social Security transformed old age from a time of fear and dependence into a time that could be faced with some measure of security and peace. As you relax into these thoughts, consider how far we've traveled, from clay tablets recording grain debts to social safety nets that catch millions. Each innovation built upon the last, each opened new possibilities, and together they created a world where ordinary people could plan, save, dream, and build better lives. Part 4: The Modern Era and Universal Access. As we continue our peaceful journey through time, let's rest our minds on 1944, when representatives from 44 nations gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. They created institutions like the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, but what mattered most for ordinary people was the stability these organizations brought to the global financial system. Currency values became more predictable. International trade became smoother. For a small business owner in Kansas or a farmer in rural France, this meant that the value of their savings wouldn't suddenly evaporate due to wild currency fluctuations. The world's financial system was becoming safer and more reliable for everyone. Now, drift forward to 1946, when the first true credit card emerged, not as we know it today, but as a beginning. The Charge-It card allowed customers at a Brooklyn bank to make purchases at local merchants, with the bank paying the merchant and billing the customer later. By the 1950s, Diners Club and then American Express expanded this concept nationwide. For working families, this meant something profound: you could make necessary purchases even when payday was still days away. A car repair, a doctor's visit, an unexpected expense, these didn't have to mean choosing between eating and paying bills. Credit cards, when used wisely, became a buffer against life's inevitable surprises. Let yourself drift to 1950, when the first automatic payroll deposit systems began appearing in the United States. Instead of receiving a paper check that had to be physically taken to a bank, workers' wages were electronically deposited directly into their accounts. This seemingly simple change meant that a factory worker's family could access money immediately on payday without the worker having to leave the job site, stand in line at a bank, or risk losing a paycheck. For families living paycheck to paycheck, having money available the moment it was earned, safely and automatically, removed one more source of stress and vulnerability. In 1960, the first ATM was conceptualized, though it wouldn't be installed until 1967 in London. But when these machines did arrive, they revolutionized banking for working people. No longer did you need to visit a bank during business hours, which often conflicted with work schedules. A nurse finishing a night shift could withdraw cash at dawn. A construction worker could access money on Sunday. Banking became available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This convenience was especially meaningful for those whose work hours made traditional banking nearly impossible. As we breathe deeply and move through the 1960s, we encounter 1965, when the United States established Medicare and Medicaid. These programs ensured that elderly and poor Americans could access healthcare without facing financial ruin. A retiree with a modest Social Security check no longer had to choose between buying medicine and buying food. A working mother could take her sick child to the doctor without fear of bankruptcy. While not strictly a personal finance tool, these programs fundamentally changed how families could manage their money. Medical bills were no longer the leading cause of financial devastation for millions. Let's rest now on 1970, when the first money market mutual funds were created. These allowed ordinary investors to earn higher interest rates on their savings, rates that had previously only been available to large institutions and wealthy individuals. A teacher with a few $1,000s in savings could now earn institutional rates of return. This democratization of investment returns meant that middle-class families could see their savings grow more quickly, building wealth that could send children to college, start businesses, or provide security in retirement. In 1974, something quietly revolutionary happened in the United States. The Employee Retirement Income Security Act, or ERISA, was passed. This law protected workers' pension plans, ensuring that companies couldn't mismanage or steal retirement funds. But more importantly, it created the Individual Retirement Account, the IRA. For the first time, workers who didn't have company pensions could still save for retirement with tax advantages. A freelance writer, a small business owner, a contract worker, all could now build their own retirement security. Personal responsibility met government support, and millions more people could envision a financially secure old age. As we drift into the late 1970s and early 1980s, personal computers began entering homes and offices. By 1982, software like VisiCalc and Lotus 1-2-3 allowed ordinary people to create detailed budgets and track expenses on their own computers. A family could see exactly where every dollar went, identify patterns, and make informed decisions. This level of financial awareness, which once required hiring an accountant, became available to anyone with a computer and the willingness to learn. Knowledge truly became power, and that power was spreading to the masses. Let yourself settle into 1986, when the Tax Reform Act created the 401k retirement plan as we know it today. Employers could contributions. A secretary contributing $50 per paycheck would see her employer add $25 more. This free money through employer matching meant that even modest savers could accumulate substantial retirement funds over time. The 401k transformed retirement planning from a luxury of the professional class to an achievable goal for nearly every now offer retirement savings plans where workers contributed pre-tax money, often with employer matching employed person. And finally, as this chapter closes, consider 1995, when the first online banking services became widely available. Wells Fargo and other banks allowed customers to check balances, transfer money, and pay bills through the internet. No more waiting for monthly statements to arrive in the mail. No more physically mailing checks to pay bills. A single parent working 2 jobs could manage all their finances from home at midnight after the children were asleep. A disabled person who found it difficult to visit banks could handle all their banking needs from home. The internet removed physical barriers, time barriers, and brought financial management into a new age of accessibility and convenience. As you relax into this knowledge, feel how the pace of change accelerated, from international stability to digital convenience, from protected pensions to internet banking. Each innovation built upon centuries of progress, each made financial tools more accessible, more powerful, and more democratic. The journey continues, but rest here for a moment, in the comfort of knowing how far humanity has come in making financial security available to all. Part 5: The Digital Revolution and Financial Improvements. Let us drift now into the late 1990s, a time of remarkable transformation. In 1998, PayPal was founded, initially to facilitate payments between handheld devices, but it quickly evolved into something more profound. For the first time, ordinary people could send money to anyone with an email address, instantly and securely. A college student selling textbooks online, a craftsperson selling handmade goods, a freelancer working for clients across the country, all could receive payments without needing a merchant account or expensive credit card processing equipment. The barriers to participating in commerce fell away, and entrepreneurship became accessible to anyone with internet access and an idea. As we breathe slowly and continue forward, we arrive at 1999, when financial aggregation services began to emerge. Websites like Yodlee allowed people to see all their financial accounts, checking, savings, credit cards, investments, in one place. A working parent no longer needed to log into 5 different websites or sort through stacks of paper statements to understand their complete financial picture. Everything was there, in one view, making it easier to budget, plan, and make informed decisions. Financial clarity, once requiring hours of manual work, became available at a glance. Let yourself rest on the year 2000, when microfinance institutions began gaining global recognition, particularly through organizations like Grameen Bank, which had been operating since the 1980s but achieved widespread attention when founder Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006. These institutions made tiny loans, sometimes as small as $25, to the world's poorest people, enabling them to start small businesses. A woman in rural Bangladesh could borrow enough to buy a sewing machine and begin taking in tailoring work. A farmer in Kenya could purchase seeds and tools. Microfinance proved that even the poorest individuals were creditworthy when given fair terms and genuine opportunity, transforming millions of lives across the developing world. Now, drift forward to 2003, when the Roth IRA contribution limits were significantly expanded and the accounts became more widely understood and adopted. Unlike traditional IRAs, Roth accounts were funded with after-tax money but grew tax-free, and withdrawals in retirement were completely tax-free. For young workers and middle-income families, this was transformative. A nurse's aide contributing throughout her career could retire with hundreds of thousands of dollars that she could withdraw without owing a penny in taxes. The Roth IRA became one of the most powerful wealth-building tools available to ordinary Americans. In 2006, the Pension Protection Act made a subtle but powerful change to 401k plans. It encouraged automatic enrollment. Instead of workers having to actively sign up for retirement savings, they were automatically enrolled and had to opt out if they chose. This simple reversal of the default option dramatically increased participation rates. Behavioral economics showed that when saving became the default choice, people saved. Workers who might have put off the decision to enroll for years suddenly found themselves building retirement wealth, sometimes without even realizing it at first. The path of least resistance became the path to financial security. Let us breathe deeply and move to 2007, when the first iPhone was released, and with it began the era of mobile banking apps. By 2008 and 2009, major banks offered full-featured apps that allowed customers to deposit checks by taking photos, transfer money instantly, pay bills, and monitor accounts, all from a device in their pocket. A delivery driver could deposit his tips during his lunch break by photographing checks. A parent could transfer money to a child away at college in seconds. Banking became not just convenient but instantaneous and omnipresent. Financial management could happen anywhere, anytime. In 2011, mobile payment systems like Venmo launched, transforming how ordinary people exchanged money with friends and family. Splitting a restaurant bill, paying back a friend who covered your movie ticket, sending birthday money to a niece, all became instant and effortless. But more significantly, these platforms began enabling small transactions between strangers for goods and services. A teenager could get paid immediately for mowing a neighbor's lawn. A musician could receive payment from someone who enjoyed their street performance. The friction of small financial exchanges melted away, making countless small economic interactions easier for everyone. Let yourself drift to 2013, when robo-advisors like Betterment and Wealthfront became mainstream. These services used algorithms to create and manage investment portfolios automatically, with minimum investments as low as $500 and fees a fraction of traditional financial advisors. A barista, a retail worker, a recent graduate, all could access sophisticated, diversified investment strategies that had previously required tens of thousands of dollars and expensive advisors. Professional quality investment management became affordable. And finally, as we close this chapter, consider 2015, when Buy Now Pay Later services began expanding beyond traditional retail. Companies like Affirm and Afterpay allowed consumers to split purchases into interest-free installment payments. While credit cards had served a similar function, these services often didn't require traditional credit scores, making them accessible to younger people and those building credit. A student could buy a laptop needed for classes and pay over 3 months. A worker could purchase interview clothes for a job opportunity and pay in installments. Access to necessary goods became easier, particularly for those whom traditional credit systems had excluded. Rest in this moment, feeling the acceleration of change, from digital payments to mobile banking, from microfinance to robo-advisors. Each innovation removed barriers, each made financial tools more accessible, more intuitive, and more powerful. The story of personal finance has always been one of expanding access, of bringing tools once available only to the wealthy within reach of everyone. And that story continues to unfold, day by day, creating new possibilities for people everywhere to build security, pursue dreams, and craft better lives. Part 6: The Age of Empowerment and Financial Wellness. As we drift into the latter half of the 2010s, let us settle on 2016, when apps like Acorns and Digit began using artificial intelligence to help people save automatically. These apps would analyze your spending patterns and automatically transfer small amounts, sometimes just a few dollars, from checking to savings when you could afford it. The beauty was in its invisibility. A delivery driver or retail worker would suddenly discover they had saved hundreds of dollars without even thinking about it. The apps did the hard work of deciding when and how much to save, removing the mental burden and making saving nearly effortless. Financial discipline, once requiring constant vigilance, became automated and gentle. Now, let yourself drift to 2017, when cryptocurrency and blockchain technology captured mainstream attention, but more importantly, when financial literacy apps and platforms proliferated. Services like Khan Academy offered free, comprehensive courses on personal finance, budgeting, investing, credit, and taxes, all accessible to anyone with internet access. A single parent working night shifts could watch lessons during breaks. A teenager could learn about compound interest before making financial mistakes. Knowledge that once required expensive courses or books became free and available to everyone, everywhere, at any time. Let us breathe slowly and move to 2018, when high-yield online savings accounts began offering interest rates significantly higher than traditional banks, sometimes 50 to 100 times higher. Banks like Ally, Marcus, and others competed for deposits by offering rates above 2% when traditional banks offered nearly zero. A young couple saving for a house could earn meaningful interest on their down payment fund. A retiree's emergency savings could actually grow. These online banks, with no physical branches and lower overhead, could pass savings to customers, democratizing access to decent returns on basic savings. In 2019, fractional share investing became widely available through platforms like Robinhood and others. Before this, if you wanted to buy a share of Amazon stock trading at $2,000, you needed $2,000. Now, you could invest $5 and own a small fraction of that share. A college student with $20 could build a diversified portfolio across dozens of companies. A server saving tips could invest $10 here, $15 there, gradually building wealth. The barrier to entry for stock market investing, once requiring thousands of dollars, fell to essentially zero. As we continue our peaceful journey, consider 2020, a year of tremendous challenge when the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted everything. Yet from this crisis emerged innovations in financial support. Governments around the world provided direct cash payments to citizens. In the United States, stimulus checks arrived directly in bank accounts. While born of necessity, this demonstrated that governments could efficiently deliver financial support to millions of people almost instantly through digital banking systems. It proved that safety nets could be responsive and immediate, a concept that continues to shape thinking about financial security. Let yourself rest on 2021, when earned wage access programs expanded dramatically. Companies like DailyPay and PayActive allowed workers to access wages they had already earned before the traditional payday. A restaurant worker who had worked 4 days of a 2-week pay period could access those 4 days of earnings immediately if an unexpected expense arose. This wasn't a loan or an advance, it was simply faster access to money already earned. For workers living paycheck to paycheck, this flexibility meant fewer overdraft fees, less need for predatory payday loans, and less financial stress. The arbitrary timing of paydays became less absolute. In 2022, financial wellness programs became standard benefits at many employers, not just large corporations but increasingly at smaller companies too. These programs offered free financial counseling, debt management assistance, budgeting tools, and retirement planning help. A warehouse worker struggling with credit card debt could meet with a counselor at no cost. An administrative assistant could get help creating a budget or planning for a child's education. What was once only available to wealthy people who could afford financial advisors became an employee benefit accessible to ordinary workers. Now drift to 2023, when artificial intelligence began powering sophisticated personal finance tools that offered customized advice. Apps could analyze your spending, predict upcoming expenses, suggest when to move money between accounts, and even negotiate bills on your behalf. The technology that once required human financial advisors charging hundreds of dollars per hour became available in apps costing a few dollars per month. A nurse, a teacher, a mechanic, anyone could have access to financial guidance that was personalized, proactive, and remarkably intelligent. Let us breathe deeply and consider 2024, when buy now, pay later services evolved into more comprehensive financial tools, and when financial institutions increasingly focused on financial health rather than just profit. Banks began offering features like early direct deposit, receiving paychecks up to 2 days early, and automatic savings roundups. Credit card companies started providing free credit score monitoring and personalized tips for improvement. The industry began recognizing that helping customers achieve financial stability was good for everyone. The relationship between financial institutions and customers was slowly shifting from purely transactional to genuinely supportive. As you rest in this knowledge, feel the complete arc of our journey, from clay tablets in ancient Mesopotamia to AI-powered apps in your pocket. Every innovation, every institution, every tool we've encountered was created by people trying to solve problems, to make life better, to give more people access to security and opportunity. The story of personal finance is ultimately a story of human progress, of expanding circles of possibility, of democratizing tools that build better lives. And this story continues, every day, creating new opportunities for people everywhere to achieve financial wellness, security, and peace of mind. Part 7. Fundamental Principles That Changed Lives. Now that we've traveled through the history of financial innovation, let us drift into the timeless principles that these tools enabled people to discover. Close your eyes and breathe deeply as we explore the wisdom that emerged from centuries of human experience with money. The first principle that transformed lives was beautifully simple: pay yourself first. This concept, popularized in the early 20th century but practiced informally for generations, meant that before paying any bills or making any purchases, you set aside money for savings. A factory worker in the 1920s who saved 10% of each paycheck before doing anything else found that living on the remaining 90% became natural. The discipline wasn't about deprivation, it was about making saving automatic and non-negotiable. This single habit created more millionaires from ordinary incomes than perhaps any other financial practice. As we breathe slowly and continue, consider the power of compound interest, which Albert Einstein allegedly called the eighth wonder of the world. When Benjamin Franklin died in 1790, he left small sums to Boston and Philadelphia with instructions that they could not be fully spent for 200 years. When the trust finally matured, those modest amounts had grown to millions. This demonstrated something profound: given enough time, even small amounts of money can become substantial wealth. A young worker, who invests just $50 per month from age 25 to retirement at 65, earning average market returns, could accumulate hundreds of thousands of dollars. Time, more than the amount invested, determines wealth. Let yourself drift to the principle of diversification, an idea that became formal investment wisdom in the 1950s but that ordinary people had understood intuitively for centuries. The old saying, "Don't put all your eggs in one basket," contained profound financial truth. A farmer who grew only one crop risked everything on that crop's success. But farmers who grew wheat and corn and raised chickens and pigs, they could weather any single disaster. In modern investing, spreading money across different stocks, bonds, and assets meant that no single failure could destroy you. This principle allowed ordinary investors to take reasonable risks while protecting themselves from catastrophic losses. Now, rest on the concept of living below your means, a principle so simple yet so powerful. Throughout history, people who spent less than they earned, regardless of how much they earned, built security and wealth. A schoolteacher earning a modest salary who lived frugally could retire comfortably, while a doctor earning 10 times as much but spending it all lived in constant financial stress. The gap between earning and spending was where wealth lived. This wasn't about deprivation, it was about intentionality, about valuing future security over present consumption. In the mid-20th century, financial advisors began teaching the importance of an emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of expenses set aside in easily accessible savings. This wasn't a new idea. Prudent families had always kept something back for hard times. But formalizing it as a specific goal made it achievable. A nurse who methodically built her emergency fund discovered something liberating. She could handle a car repair, a medical bill, an unexpected expense without panic or debt. Financial emergencies stopped being catastrophes and became merely inconveniences. The peace of mind this brought was perhaps more valuable than the money itself. Let us breathe deeply and consider the power of budgeting, or simply knowing where your money goes. In the 1930s, home economics courses taught young people to track every penny. While that level of detail might seem extreme, the underlying principle was transformative: awareness creates control. A young couple who tracked their spending for just 1 month often discovered they were spending hundreds of dollars on things they didn't value. Coffee shops, impulse purchases, subscriptions they'd forgotten, money leaking away invisibly. Once visible, these leaks could be plugged, and that money redirected toward goals that actually mattered. As we continue our peaceful journey, reflect on the principle of delayed gratification, studied extensively by psychologists but understood by successful savers throughout history. The famous marshmallow experiment showed that children who could wait 15 minutes for 2 marshmallows instead of eating one immediately grew up to be more successful in many ways. In financial terms, this meant choosing to save for a quality item rather than buying a cheap version immediately, or choosing to invest for retirement rather than spend on luxuries today. The ability to delay gratification, to choose future benefit over immediate pleasure, was perhaps the single strongest predictor of financial success. In the 1970s and 80s, consumer advocates began teaching people to distinguish between needs and wants. A need was shelter, a want was a house in a prestigious neighborhood. A need was transportation, a want was a luxury car. This distinction sounds obvious, but practicing it was revolutionary. A family that consciously chose to meet needs modestly and be selective about wants found they could save substantial amounts even on average incomes. They discovered that many wants, once examined, weren't really that important. What mattered was having the freedom to choose. Let yourself drift to the principle of investing in yourself, your education, your skills, and your health. Throughout history, the best investment anyone could make was in their own human capital. A young person who learned a valuable skill, who invested in education, who maintained their health, these investments paid returns for a lifetime. A carpenter who bought quality tools and took classes in new techniques could command higher wages. A worker who stayed healthy avoided medical expenses and could work longer. The principle was clear: you are your most valuable asset, and investing in yourself pays the highest returns. And finally, consider the principle of starting now. Whether you were 25 or 45 or even 65, the best time to begin saving and investing was always the present moment. A 40-year-old who felt they'd started too late and gave up would reach 65 with nothing. But a 40-year-old, who started immediately, even with small amounts, would reach 65 with something substantial. Every day delayed was opportunity lost to compound interest, to habit formation, to building wealth. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and financial security begins with a single dollar saved. Part 8: The Psychology of Money and Human Behavior. As we drift deeper into understanding, let us explore how humans actually behave with money, the psychology that shapes our financial lives. Close your eyes and breathe as we discover insights that have helped millions make better choices. The first insight researchers discovered was the concept of mental accounting, identified by economist Richard Thaler in the 1980s. People treat money differently depending on where it comes from or what it's designated for. A worker might carefully budget their paycheck but freely spend a tax refund or bonus, even though it's all the same money. Understanding this tendency allowed people to use it constructively, by mentally accounting their raise as savings money or their bonus as investment money. They could direct windfalls toward long-term goals rather than spending them impulsively. The realization was simple but powerful: we can shape our financial behavior by consciously choosing how we categorize our money. Now, let yourself drift to the concept of loss aversion, another profound psychological discovery. Studies showed that the pain of losing $100 is roughly twice as intense as the pleasure of gaining $100. This explained why people made poor financial decisions out of fear, holding on to losing investments too long, or avoiding the stock market entirely after one bad experience. But understanding this bias freed people from its grip. A young investor who knew about loss aversion could recognize when fear was making decisions instead of logic, and could act rationally even when emotions screamed otherwise. Let us breathe slowly and consider the power of default options, a principle that has quietly transformed millions of lives. When retirement savings became opt-out instead of opt-in, participation rates soared from around 60% to over 90% in many companies. People tend to stick with whatever is presented as the default choice. Understanding this allowed individuals to design their own defaults, automatically transferring money to savings, automatically increasing retirement contributions each year, automatically paying bills. By making the right choices automatic, people removed the need for constant willpower and discipline. As we continue peacefully, reflect on the concept of present bias, our tendency to overvalue immediate rewards and undervalue future benefits. A person might choose to spend $50 on dinner today rather than save it, even though those $50 invested could become several $100s by retirement. But once people understood this bias, they could counteract it. They could make their future selves more real and immediate by visualizing retirement, by calculating exactly what today's choices meant for tomorrow. A construction worker who vividly imagined his 70-year-old self found it easier to save, because he was no longer saving for an abstract future, he was helping a real person, his future self. Let yourself rest on the idea of social proof and comparison. Humans are deeply influenced by what others around them do. In the 1950s and 60s, as more people began investing in stocks, their neighbors and friends felt more comfortable doing the same. This could work negatively. Keeping up with the Joneses led to destructive overspending. But it could also work positively. When communities embraced saving, when workplaces celebrated financial milestones, when friends supported each other's financial goals, success became contagious. Understanding this allowed people to consciously choose their financial peer group, surrounding themselves with others who shared their values about money. Now drift to the concept of scarcity mindset versus abundance mindset, ideas explored deeply in recent decades but understood intuitively throughout history. A scarcity mindset saw the world as having limited resources. If someone else won, you lost. This led to hoarding, fear-based decisions, and missed opportunities. An abundance mindset recognized that wealth could be created, that cooperation often benefited everyone, that calculated risks could lead to growth. A small business owner with an abundance mindset might invest in employee training, confident that the investment would return manifold. The same owner with a scarcity mindset might hoard every penny and stifle growth. The mindset you chose shaped your financial reality. Let us breathe deeply and consider the power of specific, written goals. Research consistently showed that people who wrote down specific financial goals, save $10,000 for a down payment by December 2026, were vastly more likely to achieve them than people with vague intentions like, save more money. The act of writing made goals concrete and real. A teacher who wrote down her goal to eliminate credit card debt within 18 months and posted it on her refrigerator found that every spending decision was measured against that visible commitment. Specificity transformed wishes into plans, and plans into reality. As our peaceful journey continues, reflect on the concept of the hedonic treadmill, the discovery that people quickly adapt to improved circumstances and return to a baseline level of happiness. A person who got a 20% raise initially felt wonderful, but within months, their spending had increased and they felt no happier than before. Understanding this pattern freed people from endlessly chasing more. They could consciously step off the treadmill by not inflating their lifestyle with each raise, instead directing new income towards savings and investments. A couple who maintained their modest lifestyle even as income grew found they achieved financial independence decades earlier than their free-spending peers. Let yourself drift to the importance of financial identity and self-story. People who saw themselves as savers or investors made different choices than those who saw themselves as spenders or not good with money. These identities were often formed in childhood but could be consciously rewritten. A young adult who grew up in a family that struggled with money might have internalized the story, "My family was never good with money, so I'm not either." But recognizing this as just a story, not a truth, allowed them to write a new narrative: "I'm learning to be smart with money. I'm building financial security." This new identity then shaped behavior, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of success rather than struggle. As you rest in these psychological insights, feel how understanding yourself, your biases, your tendencies, your mental patterns, gave you power over them. Personal finance was never just about numbers and budgets, it was always about human behavior, about working with your psychology rather than against it, about understanding why we do what we do so we can make choices that serve our deepest values and long-term well-being. Part 9: Common Mistakes and Hard-Won Wisdom. As we drift into our final chapters, let us explore the mistakes that countless people have made and the wisdom gained from those experiences. Breathe deeply and relax, knowing that every mistake taught valuable lessons that helped others avoid the same pitfalls. The first common mistake that emerged across generations was carrying high-interest debt, particularly credit card debt. In the 1980s and 90s, as credit cards became ubiquitous, millions of Americans found themselves trapped in cycles of debt, paying 18 or 20% interest while their savings earned 3 or 4%. The lesson learned was crystal clear: a dollar spent paying down high-interest debt provided a guaranteed return equal to that interest rate, better than almost any investment. A nurse who aggressively paid off her credit cards at 20% interest was effectively earning a 20% return, guaranteed and tax-free. The wisdom became: eliminate high-interest debt before investing, because no investment could reliably beat those returns. Now, let yourself drift to the mistake of not having adequate insurance. Throughout history, families who seemed financially secure were devastated by events they hadn't insured against: a house fire, a serious illness, a breadwinner's death. The lesson was learned again and again: hope for the best but prepare for the worst. A young family might skip life insurance to save a small amount each month, but if tragedy struck, that small savings could cost hundreds of thousands. The wisdom became clear: proper insurance, health, life, disability, property, wasn't an expense but a foundation, the bedrock upon which financial security was built. Let us breathe slowly and consider the mistake of trying to time the market. For decades, studies showed that professional investors rarely beat the market through timing, and individual investors did even worse. The person who sold everything during a market dip, certain it would fall further, often missed the recovery. The person who waited for the perfect time to invest often never invested at all. The wisdom learned was simple and liberating: time in the market beats timing the market. A factory worker, who invested steadily through booms and busts, never trying to predict the future, accumulated more wealth than sophisticated investors who constantly traded, chasing perfect timing that never came. As we continue peacefully, reflect on the mistake of neglecting retirement savings when young. The mathematics were unforgiving: a 25-year-old who saved just $200 monthly until 35, then stopped, would have more at retirement than someone who started at 35 and saved $200 monthly until 65, despite saving far less total money. The early bird captured the power of compound interest. Yet millions of young workers delayed, thinking they'd save more later. The wisdom learned: there is no substitute for starting early. Even tiny amounts in your 20s became substantial sums by retirement, while large amounts started late never quite caught up. Let yourself rest on the mistake of ignoring inflation. A retiree in the 1970s who thought their comfortable savings would last for life discovered that as prices doubled and tripled, their fixed income bought less and less each year. Money sitting in low-interest savings accounts actually lost value over time when inflation was factored in. The wisdom: your savings must grow faster than inflation, which typically meant investing at least some money in stocks or other growth assets. A schoolteacher who kept all her money in savings accounts earning 1% while inflation ran at 3% was actually losing 2% of purchasing power each year. True security required growth that outpaced inflation. Now drift to the mistake of co-signing loans or mixing family and money carelessly. Throughout history, relationships were destroyed when money was lent and not repaid, or when one person co-signed a loan and ended up responsible for someone else's debt. The wisdom wasn't that you should never help family and friends, but that you should only lend what you could afford to lose, and treat co-signing as if you were taking out the loan yourself, because legally, you were. A generous brother who co-signed for his sister's car loan found his credit destroyed when she couldn't pay. The lesson: help from a place of clarity, not obligation, and understand the true risks involved. Let us breathe deeply and consider the mistake of lifestyle inflation, increasing spending whenever income increased. A young professional who received a $5,000 raise and immediately leased a nicer car, moved to a more expensive apartment, and upgraded everything found themselves no closer to financial goals despite the higher income. The wisdom: when income increases, increase saving first, lifestyle second, if at all. A couple who banked every raise, maintaining the lifestyle they'd had on their previous income, found they could retire in their early 50s, while peers who inflated their lifestyle worked into their 70s. As our peaceful journey continues, reflect on the mistake of not diversifying income sources. Workers who relied entirely on a single employer, with no side income, no investments, no alternative skills, found themselves vulnerable. A factory worker whose plant closed, a bookkeeper whose industry automated, they struggled because they'd built their financial lives on a single pillar. The wisdom learned was to create multiple streams of income when possible: a part-time business, rental property, investments that paid dividends, skills that could be freelanced. Diversification wasn't just for investments, it was for income too. Let yourself drift to the mistake of financial secrecy and shame. Countless couples struggled because they didn't communicate honestly about money. One partner hid debt while the other hid spending. The lack of transparency created crises that could have been prevented. Similarly, individuals who felt shame about their financial situation avoided seeking help until problems became catastrophic. The wisdom: financial honesty, with partners, with family, and with oneself, was essential. A couple who held regular money dates to discuss finances openly found they worked as a team rather than at cross purposes. There was no shame in struggling, the shame was in suffering alone when help and support were available. And finally, consider the mistake of seeking get-rich-quick schemes. Every generation had its version: land speculation in the 1800s, penny stocks in the 1900s, day trading in the 1990s, cryptocurrency gambling in the 2020s. The pattern was always the same: promises of easy wealth, minimal risk, and quick returns. And the result was usually the same: losses, sometimes devastating. The wisdom: real wealth is built slowly, through patience, discipline, and time. A postal worker who invested steadily in index funds for 30 years became a millionaire. A doctor who chased hot tips and jumped from one scheme to another ended up with less. The tortoise always beat the hare, steady always beat spectacular. As you rest in this hard-won wisdom, feel the common thread through all these lessons: security comes from patience, not rushing; from consistency, not perfection; from learning, not knowing everything at the start. Every mistake was an opportunity to learn, every setback a chance to adjust course. The path to financial wellness was never straight, but it was always forward. Part 10, Looking Forward, the Future of Personal Finance. As we approach the end of our journey, let us look toward the horizon and consider where personal finance is heading, breathing slowly as we imagine the possibilities that await. The story of financial empowerment continues to unfold, and the future holds promise for even greater accessibility and understanding. The first emerging trend is the continued rise of financial education in schools. For most of history, young people learned about money only if their families taught them, creating cycles of financial literacy or illiteracy across generations. But now, more states and countries are requiring personal finance education in high schools. A teenager graduating today might understand compound interest, budgeting, and investing before entering the workforce, knowledge those previous generations learned through painful trial and error, if they learned it at all. This democratization of financial knowledge promises to lift entire generations into greater security and prosperity. Now, let yourself drift to the evolution of artificial intelligence in personal finance. AI assistants are becoming more sophisticated, able to analyze your unique financial situation and provide customized guidance that once required expensive human advisors. A grocery store clerk could receive advice as personalized and intelligent as a millionaire gets from their wealth manager. These systems can predict upcoming expenses, identify savings opportunities, optimize investment strategies, and even negotiate bills on your behalf. The future promises financial advice that is simultaneously more accessible, more affordable, and more personalized than ever before. Let us breathe slowly and consider the trend toward real-time financial information. For most of history, people had to wait for bank statements in the mail, for quarterly reports, for annual summaries. Now and increasingly in the future, every transaction is instant and visible. You can know your exact financial position at any moment. But more than that, systems can alert you in real time to potential problems, suspicious charge, an upcoming overdraft, an opportunity to save. A delivery driver can receive an alert: you're on track to overdraft in 3 days based on scheduled bills. Would you like to transfer money from savings? This immediate awareness and guidance transforms money management from reactive to proactive. Reflect on the growing recognition of financial wellness as a component of overall well-being. Employers increasingly understand that financially stressed employees are less productive, less healthy, and less engaged. The future workplace will likely include comprehensive financial wellness programs as standard benefits, not just retirement plans, but emergency savings accounts, student loan assistance, financial counseling, and education. A warehouse worker struggling with debt will have the same access to financial guidance as executives once did. This shift recognizes that helping employees achieve financial security benefits everyone. Let yourself rest on the trend toward portable benefits and the gig economy. Traditional employment models are changing, with more people working multiple jobs, freelancing, or moving between employers. The future must accommodate this flexibility with benefits that travel with the worker rather than being tied to a single employer. Retirement accounts, health insurance, and other benefits are evolving to be truly portable. A graphic designer working 3 part-time gigs will be able to build retirement security as easily as someone with a single traditional job. The future of work is flexible, and financial systems are adapting to support that flexibility. Let us consider the evolution of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. While speculation has dominated headlines, the underlying technology promises interesting possibilities: faster international transfers at lower cost, financial services for the unbanked, transparent transactions, and new forms of ownership and investment. A domestic worker sending money to family in another country might soon pay pennies in fees instead of significant percentages. A small farmer in a developing nation might access credit and insurance through blockchain-based systems. The technology is still maturing, but its potential to expand financial access is real. And now, as we approach our final fact, consider the most important trend of all: the growing understanding that personal finance is personal. The future recognizes that there is no single path to financial wellness. What works for one person, aggressive saving, frugal living, early retirement, might not work for another whose values prioritize different experiences. The future of personal finance is increasingly customized, increasingly respectful of diverse goals and circumstances, increasingly focused on helping each individual define and achieve their own version of financial success. An artist prioritizing creative freedom over wealth accumulation, an entrepreneur taking calculated risks, a worker choosing stability and steady progress, all are valid paths, and the future offers tools and support for each. As you rest in these visions of the future, feel hope and possibility. The journey from Sumerian clay tablets to AI financial advisors spans thousands of years, but the core purpose remains unchanged, giving people tools to build security, to pursue dreams, to craft lives of opportunity. Every innovation we've explored, from ancient grain banks to modern apps, serve this same beautiful purpose. And that purpose continues to drive innovation, to inspire solutions, to create a better financial world. The story of personal finance is ultimately a story of human progress and human compassion, countless individuals throughout history working to create systems that helped rather than harmed, that lifted rather than exploited, that expanded opportunity rather than concentrated it. You are part of this ongoing story, inheriting the wisdom of millennia and contributing to a future where financial wellness is truly accessible to all. Breathe deeply, rest peacefully, and know that the tools, knowledge, and opportunities available to you today represent the culmination of thousands of years of human innovation, all designed to help ordinary people build extraordinary lives. Closing. And so our journey together comes to a close. We've traveled from ancient Mesopotamia to the present day, from clay tablets to smartphones, from grain banks to AI advisors. We've explored 101 facts about personal finance, innovations, principles, psychology, mistakes, and future possibilities, all woven together into a single story, the story of humanity's ongoing effort to help ordinary people build financial security and opportunity. As you drift toward sleep, let these facts settle gently in your mind like snowflakes, each one a small piece of wisdom, together forming a complete picture. Remember that personal finance, at its heart, is simple: spend less than you earn, save for the future, invest for growth, protect against catastrophe, and be patient. Everything else is detail and refinement of these core truths. Sleep now, peacefully, knowing that the tools and knowledge you need are available, that millions have walked this path before you, and that financial wellness is achievable, one small step at a time. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with peace, possibility, and hope for a secure financial future.